Chapter 10, The Backpack. Marty had taken a long hot shower and was sitting on the floor of his bedroom trying on a pair of dry sneakers. Grace was sitting on his bed. "Did you really think the dolphins were sharks?" she asked. "I sure did. I'm happy to have feet to put into these shoes. For a while there, I thought they were at the bottom of the lake going for a run without me. I take it that you still want to go to the Congo." "Duh du jour," Marty answered, meaning duh of the day, one of his and Luther's favorite sayings. He stood and looked out the window. "I have to admit that when I was in the middle of the lake being torn apart by sharks, there were a few seconds when even Omega Prep was looking pretty good. But now that I'm whole again," he walked over to the suitcase and found a t-shirt. "I doubt Wolf is going to take us to the Congo now. I really blew it." Grace was just thinking how she had blown it by fainting when Marty needed her most, and she also felt terrible for not trying harder to stop him from leaving. But what she felt even more guilty about was her first thought upon believing he had drowned. "How did Wolf lose his leg?" Marty asked. "He wouldn't say," Grace answered. "Wolf was waiting for them in the library. He had a fire burning in the fireplace and a thermos of hot chocolate on the table in front of the sofa. Sitting next to the thermos was a small backpack and a miniature camp stove with a bottle of fuel. The twins stared at the objects in numbed silence. The backpack and camp stove had belonged to their father. "Where did you get them?" Grace whispered. "In the Amazon," Wolf said, "at the crash site. I flew there as soon as I heard about it. I just got back yesterday." "You've been looking for them for 6 months?" Marty asked. Wolf nodded. "I know it may not seem like it, but my sister and I were very close, and Timothy was a good friend." He took a deep breath. "I'm afraid the pack is as close as I've come to finding them." Marty had intended to march into the library and start right in his Congo campaign, but he hadn't expected this. He brushed his fingers across the faded blue fabric of the backpack. His father had carried his notebooks and tape recorder in it, as well as the little camp stove, which he used to brew coffee. He couldn't remember a time his father didn't have it with him. The pack was empty except for the camp stove and your father's journal, which was all but ruined, and this. He reached into the pack and pulled out the Mother's Day card they had sent. Paper clipped to it was a sketch Marty had drawn of himself and Grace walking along a beach holding their mother's hands. The twins stared at the card and were nearly overcome with sadness. "I haven't given up on finding your parents," Wolf said. "I have people down there looking right now, and they'll continue the search until every lead, however small, has been exhausted. I'm in constant touch with them. If your parents are alive, we'll find them." "Do you think they're alive?" Grace asked. "To be honest," Wolf answered quietly, "I don't know. 6 months is a long time, but they must have survived the crash or we would have found their bodies at the site. They either wandered off on their own or else they were injured and someone came along and moved them. There's a number of uncontacted tribes in the area. They might be in one of their camps recuperating. I spent most of my life looking for things people don't believe exist, and I've had pretty good success rate. The only reason I came back was because of you and to take care of some pressing business." He looked them both in the eye. "I haven't given up on finding them, and I don't want you to give up either." "We won't," they said in unison, feeling better about their parents' disappearance than in the months. "Good," Wolf said. Wolf took a deep breath. "I know you both have a lot of questions for me, but let's clear up this Congo first." "I think you should take us with you," Grace said. Marty stared at his sister in amazement. He had never liked her more than at that moment. Grace was equally surprised until she blurted this out. She had wanted to return to school. Perhaps nearly losing Marty had changed her life. Perhaps she was finally ready to confront some of her fears. "I'm with Grace," Marty added quickly. "I know my stunt at the lake this morning might have scared you a little, but I promise to follow your rules to the letter from now on." "It scared me a lot," Wolf said, "but your swim has nothing to do with my decision. I made up my mind last night. I can't take you to the Congo." "Why not?" Grace asked with a mixture of disappointment and relief. "First, you have more than a month of school left. My plan was to hire a tutor and have you finish up the year right here. Unfortunately, Laurel and I have to get to the Congo right away, so there's no time for me to find a tutor. If I'd known about the egg, I would have waited and had you come after school was out. I'm afraid I'm going to have to send you back to Switzerland." Marty was dumbfounded. He had just about given up on Wolf taking them to the Congo, but he didn't think they would be sent back to the school. Grace was not surprised at all by Wolf's decision. He had said as much as the day before in the library, but now that she had changed her mind, she wasn't going to give up without a fight. We learn a lot more in the Congo than we would at any school, she said. That's probably true, Wolf admitted. And you told Laurel that you were planning on taking us to Lake Tele eventually anyway, Grace argued. Why not get it over with? You were going to take us to Lake Tele? Marty asked, wondering what else Grace had neglected to tell him. Yes, I was, Wolf said, and I promise I'll take you there one day, but not this trip. It's too dangerous. Marty was still confused. Why do you want to take us to Lake Tele? I'm afraid the answer is going to have to wait until I get back. It's complicated. Why can't we just stay on Cryptos? Marty asked. Everyone here has at least 2 full-time jobs, and there will be no one to watch after you. We don't need babysitters, Marty protested. I'm sure you don't, but I'll feel a lot better knowing you're at the school where it's safe. I've already contacted Dr. Beazle, and he's looking forward to your return. I bet he is, Marty said. I know this is disappointing, but I promise I'll make it up to you. When I get back, we'll start all over again. Wolf stood. Here's my new plan. We have a jet of sorts. Phyllis will fly Laurel and me to the Congo, then fly up to Switzerland and drop you and Grace off. When we finish at Lake Tele, we'll pick you up and take you back to Cryptos. What if school isn't out yet? He asked. I'll take you back to Cryptos anyway, and that will be the last you'll ever see of that or any other boarding school again. Chapter 11, Preparations. Grace and Marty saw very little of each other over the next few days. Marty spent his time exploring the island and doing his best to wear down every member of Wolf's merry band of pirates. He left the house at dawn and returned well after dark, determined to see every nook and cranny on Cryptos and to learn everything he could about Wolf's operation before he was sent back to school. One of the things he learned was that his uncle operated on a shoestring budget. Almost all the money E. Wolf made was put back into the company for research and development. This left a little ready cash for cryptid research or to fix things like the engine on the Jet Wolf was to take to the Congo. Marty was in the hangar when Phil, Wolf, and his 2 mechanics were discussing what to do about it. The engine shot, one of the mechanics said. There has to be some way to fix it, Wolf insisted. You've never let me down before. There's always a first time, the other mechanic said. She needs a new engine. I can't afford a new engine, Wolf said. The mechanic shrugged and walked off. There were plenty of other broken things in the hangar for them to fix. What are you going to do? Phil asked. I have no idea. What about Ted? I bet he could come up with something. Wolf shook his head. I haven't seen him since I got back to the island. He's sealed in the lab working on something. You know how he is. Yeah, Phil said. He's weird. I have an idea, Marty offered, ignoring Wolf and Phil's skeptical expressions. I'm sure Mom and Dad left Grace and me plenty of money. You're welcome to use my portion to buy an engine. That's the best offer I've had in a year, Wolf said, smiling for the first time in 2 days. They did leave you a good sum of money, but I put it into a trust fund until we find them, or until you're 21. I'm afraid it won't help us today. Even if we had the cash, Phil said, I doubt we'd be able to find an engine for her. She's a pretty old bird. Wolf explained to Marty that their expedition money came from contract work. They hired themselves out to conduct scientific surveys for universities and governments, and our next contract isn't until this summer. Until then, we have slight cash flow problem. What else is new? Phil said. Where's the contract? Marty asked. New Zealand. Look, Phil and I have to make some phone... Will Grace and I be going with you? Yes, we've been hired to keep a research team to get a good look at the Kraken. What's that? Giant squid, also known as Architholithus. Wolf and Phil started to walk away. Marty followed. Like the ones in the aquarium? No, those are very common species. Over the years, a few giant squid have washed up on the shore, but no one's ever been able to study a live specimen. Wow, New Zealand? Now, if you don't mind, Sure, Marty said. I'll just go poke around the island some more. The rule about not exploring the island alone had been forgotten almost immediately, as Marty hoped it would be. Everyone was too busy getting things ready for the Congo trip to pay much attention to what Marty was doing, although Wolf did periodically check in with him on the gizmo to make sure he was okay. In fact, Marty had pestered everyone so much that one morning Phil gave him a helmet and a dented but serviceable four-wheeler. Here's the deal, Phyllis said before handing over the keys. You have to spend at least 6 months a day riding this thing, and I don't want you anywhere near the hangar when you're on it. You're a great kid, but we have a lot of work to do, and you're driving everyone crazy. Do I make myself clear? Yes, sir. Marty gave him a salute. Then get out of here. Did you figure out what to do about the jet? No, now I'm out of here, Marty said. The only place Marty had not gained access to was the Quonset hut known as QAQ, the question and answer Quonset, which is where all the R&D, research and development, was done for E. Wolf. No one was allowed inside except Wolf, his partner Ted Bronson, and the half-dozen scientists that worked on Ted's research team. Marty had waylaid each member of the team on their way into the building in an attempt to talk his way inside, or at least find out what they were doing in there. But they were a tight-lipped bunch with a very different look from the mechanics who work in the jet Quonset, with grease under their nails and whisker stubble on their faces. The QAQ gang carried heavy briefcases, wore thick glasses, and were uniformly pale as they didn't get much sun. Ted Bronson actually lived inside the QAQ, and the rumor was that he had not stepped outside its doors in more than 3 years. When Marty asked Phil about the rumor, he said it's been longer than that. Grace spent her time in the library, but she was not reading books. Laura was teaching her to walk the high wire. The library floor was covered with mattresses to soften her many falls. She had managed to make it across the thin wire at 6 inches, a foot, and a foot and a half, but at the 2 feet high, she had yet to make it halfway across. She fell over and over again, but she didn't mind. Laura was teaching her a great deal more than how to balance on the thin wire. My mother was born under the big top and loved every aspect of the circus life, Laurel told her one day. She tried her hand at acrobatics, the high wire, training bears. She was even shot out of a cannon a time or two. But her true love was the trapeze. I wish you could have seen her. When I was little, I thought she could actually fly and wondered where she hid her wings when she was on the ground. But I learned that she didn't have wings, Laurel paused. Her last performance went flawlessly until the finale. A quadruple somersault. A very difficult feat, but one she had completed 1,000 times before. This time, though, the catcher was a fraction of a second late when she came out of the 4th rotation. His hands weren't there. She fell. Wasn't there a net? Grace asked. Yes, but she only caught the very edge of it. It wasn't enough to stop her from falling to the ground. I'm so sorry. Laurel gave her a wistful smile. She died doing what she loved and what she was born to do. My father never got over it. He changed his clown makeup from a smile to a sad frown, and when the grease paint was off, the sadness still remained. She was his life. It took me a long time to get over it, too. Before the fall, my parents had to watch me every second of the day. If they took their eyes off me, I would be out the trailer door, toddling beneath the elephants or trying to pet the kitties, which were actually lions and tigers. Grace laughed. After the fall, I stayed in our trailer most of the time, refusing to leave. Laurel continued. It was the only place I felt truly safe. If the ringmaster hadn't forced my father to put me on the wire, I don't know what would have happened to me. I think you would have been okay, Grace said. You started out bold, then changed, and became bold again. I never would have crawled under an elephant or tried to pet a lion. I've always been afraid of things. Even when you were little? Always. Laurel gave her a thoughtful look. What's your earliest memory? That's easy. Marty climbing to the very top of my parents' floor-to-ceiling bookcase to get his bag of Halloween candy. It must have been 12 feet high. You were afraid he would fall? No, Grace said. I was afraid he would fall on me. Laurel laughed. There's nothing wrong with a little fear. Being fearful can save your life. It saved mine on more than one occasion, but too much fear can stop you from living. She stepped onto the wire and began walking forward and backward. Just remember, it's all a matter of balance. One thing that helped me was to make a list of all my fears. I took them on one at a time. There are still a number of fears on that list, but it's gotten shorter over the years. How did you take them on? I simply visualized myself overcoming the fear. The great thing about the technique is that you can practice whenever you want and wherever you are. Laura closed her eyes as she walked the wire. Take deep breaths, relax, then confront the fear in the safety of your imagination. Remember what I taught you about gaze anchoring. Look at the wire in front of you, whether in your imagination as I'm doing now or for real. Don't look down at your feet. Look beyond your fear at the goal. Try not to think about the steps. In the evening, Grace worked on her fear list in her moleskin under the title Fears du Jour. The list was depressingly long, with her nightmare holding the #1 spot. But how do you confront a fear you can't remember? She wanted to talk to Laurel about this, but didn't know how to broach the subject without looking foolish. Wolf was considering taking a commercial flight to the Congo and putting Marty and Grace on another flight back to Switzerland. We won't be able to bring much in the way of equipment, he told Laurel. And of course, Bo and Vid will have to stay behind. But I don't know what else to do. We have to get to Lake Tele. If I don't tell her about the nightmare now, I might not get a chance, Grace thought. What if something happens to Laurel in the Congo? What if she decides to stay in the Congo? Her university job is gone. There's really nothing for her to come back to here. And what if Wolf breaks his word and leaves us at the boarding school? Grace didn't think he would, but if she wasn't certain. She hardly knew the man, and every time she had seen him in the past few days, he was off in another world. The few times they had spoken had been painfully awkward for him. He either glanced at his watch and said he had something important to attend to, or he passed her off to someone else, like Bertha or Phil, and quickly disappeared. Laurel, Grace began, I've been meaning to ask you about... The library door burst open. It was Wolf. Ted Bronson came through for us, he said breathlessly. He and his crew spent the night fixing the engine. I thought you said it couldn't be fixed, Laurel said, balancing on the wire. Ted's a genius. They manufactured new parts from old junk we had laying around the hangar. Will it be safe? We just tested it. It works better than the other engines. When are we leaving? Right now. He turned and left them without a word about the mattresses on the floor or his new anthropologist on the wire. Noah Blackwood stood in front of the newly opened giant panda exhibit at the Seattle Ark. He was surrounded by a group of reporters, city officials, and wealthy patrons. I have a little surprise for you, he announced, then nodded at his curator. The curator spoke into a two-way radio, and a hydraulic door began slowly open in the back of the exhibit. At first, nothing happened. Then a small black and white head appeared at the doorway. There was a gasp from the crowd. Baby panda, someone shouted. The reporter's cameras started clicking and whirring. A moment later, a second head appeared, then a third. 3 little surprises, Blackwood said with a smile as bright as the camera's strobes. They were born at my Praxis Ark 6 months ago. I thought the 2 pandas you had there were too old to reproduce, a reporter said. We thought so too, Blackwood agreed. But I guess the special diet I developed revitalized them. Aren't triplets rare? Unheard of, until now. None of this was true. The 3 cubs had been flown in directly from China 2 weeks earlier. Blackwood had sent Butch McCall, his right-hand man, over there with enough cash to hire a poacher, and together they stole the 3 cubs from 3 different mothers. The money Blackwood had paid was nothing compared to the money he would make from the lines of people flocking to the Ark to see the black and white miracles. Why didn't you tell anyone about the birth before this? The mother refused to raise her cubs, so I hand-raised them myself, Blackwood answered smoothly. I kept it quiet to reduce the cubs' stress level. I felt their survival far outweighed any need for publicity. His cell phone rang. Excuse me. He stepped away from the crowd to answer it. Wolf has left the island, a man said. How? In his jet. You told me the engine was beyond repair. Yeah, the man said, but not beyond Ted Bronson's brain. Blackwood shook his head in disgust. Who's on the airplane? His crew, the kids, and... The man hesitated. Dr. Laurel Lee. Blackwood swore, a little too loudly, and several heads turned in his direction. He smiled them away and hissed into the phone. When did she get on the island? A few days ago. I didn't even know she was here. She's been up in the house most of the time. Where are they going? According to their flight plan, the Congo... Then up to Switzerland. Wolf and Dr. Lee are going to the Congo, and the kids are being taken back to their school. Blackwood swore again, then hung up and made another phone call. When he finished, he walked back over to the reporters. I can take a small group of you into the exhibit for some close-ups if you'd like.